Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So today we're going to be continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and we got some more Nintendo 64 preview videos for you, because you guys have been really enjoying doing this one game per video testing series where I talk about games that are perfect on the core. They'd have absolutely no noticeable difference between MiSTer FPGA and real hardware, and there's a few games that are so synonymous with Nintendo 64, even people that weren't alive back then who were gamers now would know that that game was on the console, and I feel like Wave Race hits the top 5, so that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Before we get too far involved, it'd be a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But here's the current situation as of today if you want to play Wave Race 64 on the current core. It is absolutely shocking just how impressive this thing really is. Robert FPGA Zoomspots in under a year has recreated like 98% of an original Nintendo 64, so much so that it is my preferred way to play basically 95% of the Nintendo 64 library. All of the water effects here, all of the graphics, all of the VI pipeline implementations, the frame rate and everything else is just spectacular. Now don't get me wrong, I own a lot of Nintendo 64 hardware and games, and I think it is a very nice piece of hardware, but I've always thought that you needed a real CRT television to get a look out of Nintendo 64 that you would be happy with. Even with the best upscalers on the market, there's just something about an unmodded Nintendo 64 that I don't think looks incredible. Now of course you can RGB or HDMI mod them and you'll get a much cleaner image, or you could just use MiSTer FPGA. And as we hop into a race here, from all of the controls to the visuals to the music to all of the different effects, you would have absolutely no idea that this was not real Nintendo 64 hardware if you weren't watching a video about MiSTer FPGA. That is how much I believe in the performance of this game in this core. I could have just run this as a review, told you I was using HDMI modded Nintendo 64, and I don't think anyone, including everyone who watches all of my MiSTer videos, would have argued with me about that point. That is just how impressive this is, and this is a game that we've talked about so many different times on the testing series. The first time we showed this playable, it ran at like 4 frames per second. There was absolutely no waves. It was just a wireframe polygon matrix of the 3D mesh, and that was actually a lot of fun to see how, for lack of a better term, the sausage got made graphically on Nintendo 64. Seeing all those triangles moving in real time with the mesh above it totally explained to you how they got these water effects and physics back in the day. And let me tell you, if you weren't alive back when this game came out, when you saw it, this just absolutely blew your mind. We had never seen 3D graphics at home that reached the levels of Wave Race 64 waves, and that is true, and it still impresses me to this day. But as far again as the performance on MiSTer FPGA, you are just going to have an absolutely spectacular time however you decide to play it. And what I mean by that is whether you use an original Nintendo 64 controller with an adapter, if you use one of the new NSO controllers, or like I'm doing here, playing with the Brawler 64. I just prefer that as a controller, just based upon the ergonomics in my hand. But this is the type of game, again, you just sit down, you have fun, you play, you get that same Wave Race experience if you run real hardware, and then when you're done, you just turn your MiSTer off, walk away, and go on about your day the same way as if you're using real hardware. That is how good this experience is. It just lets you have fun. You never think about the fact that you're playing a recreation of Nintendo 64 hardware. You just play Wave Race, you have fun, you get a good time in, and then you just go do something else. And that is the great part about cores like this. They remove the technological barrier between what you're doing and how you're experiencing it. Sure, we could talk all day long about the different ways the FPGA code is implemented and what it takes to actually recreate a Nintendo 64 from scratch on MiSTer, or we could just say that games are damn fun, you're going to have a great time playing them, so just go and do it. That's the level that this core is currently at. We don't really even care about the technical anymore. We're just in awe about how well it's performing, how much fun you can have, and again, how great the audio sounds as well. Go ahead and listen to Wave Race for 30 seconds, and I'll come back and tell you more about how this game went from barely running to running perfectly. But enjoy. The Wave Race 64 soundtrack has always been an awesome Nintendo experience, and it sounds great coming out of the core as well. And from all of these different course intros to all of the different effects, again, if you see anything that doesn't look correct, leave me a comment down below, but I don't think anyone's going to notice anything, aside of the fact that the artwork on the side of that jet ski looks like it came off a 90s paper cup. If you were alive in the 90s, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and if you weren't, that comment will not make any sense, but I'm pretty sure Nintendo's artist just scanned in a solo cup from the 90s and decided to run with it. But one of the great things about the core is just how good the VI pipeline effects are as well. All of this fog, all of the dithering, all of the blur just makes this look and feel like a real Nintendo 64, and that is so much of what makes the hardware. PlayStation 1 had a certain look, Sega Saturn had a certain look, but the Nintendo 64 basically stood on its own as having this visual style that is unmistakably Nintendo, and all of that being in MiSTer FPGA sells that illusion, and pretty much every single VI pipeline feature was implemented in its own core. So we went from Wave Race 64 basically having no graphics whatsoever to just being a polygonal mesh, to not having any fog, to not having any texture filtering, to seeing what you see now. And the transition from having the fog to being this nice bluebird day outside is so smooth as well. All of the VI implementations are so fun to look at, and it taught a lot of people exactly how the Nintendo 64 hardware works, because when you were playing this in the 90s or even a couple of years ago, you would really just look at the image and think to yourself, this is what Nintendo 64 looks like. But going through all the different core iterations, talking about all the different VI pipeline implementations, and showing to you them one by one, everyone got a much better understanding of all of the different components that make up MiSTer FPGA and a Nintendo 64. And the great part is, with a clean HDMI out mode now, you can also make this game have a completely different look. So it is even more than a real Nintendo 64, because you can articulate the image and create something completely new but familiar in your MiSTer FPGA and Nintendo 64 experience. That's the level of attention and detail and feature set Robert brings to each core. He doesn't just recreate a console, he gives you a different way to experience games for the first time again. And that's been a lot of the fun of MiSTer FPGA, the Nintendo 64 core, clean HDMI out mode, the turbo core, all of the different feature set, being able to bring pretty much whatever controller you want to the party. You can use that original controller if that's comfortable to your hand, or if you're like me and you find that to be an absolute cramper, you can bring something completely different, plug it in, and have the exact same great time. And that is just why I consider this another perfect game, even if my racing line there was not perfect. It's because I was thinking about switching from clean HDMI mode back to the original VI pipeline implementation. And that's another fun thing about this design as well. All of these changes happen in real time. You can turn all of them off, a few of them off, and you can see everything that it affects in the image while you're still playing. It's so nice not to have to restart something like a core to be able to make those changes. And again, this is one of those courses that always really ruins it for me. I can get first place pretty much the first 2 races, but this one always seems to stick it to me a little bit. But it's been a few years since I've honestly sat down and played Wave Race a ton for fun outside of core testing. But testing this game has been an absolute pleasure. It's just one of those times where everything went together to create such a great experience. As we move over to the original VI pipeline implementation here as well, you can just tell that this looks incredible. It is another one of those games where if I just put a Nintendo 64 in a black box next to MiSTer FPGA, handed you 2 controllers and told you which one is MiSTer, which one is real hardware, I think 9 out of 10 people would be very confused unless you guessed right, because I pretty much always put things on the right that I want to trick you with, so I would put the MiSTer on the right in that instance. And if you watch some of the comparison videos, keep that in mind. You can probably figure out what I'm trying to do, even if subconsciously I try to make sure you don't know I'm doing it. As we move back over to clean HDMI mode one more time and jump that little rock wall, nice move even if it was accidental, you can just see here 2 different ways to play the same game, but both of them are fun. And that is the main takeaway of these long-term reviews when I show you games I consider perfect. You sit down, you have fun, that's all the core does. And at the end of the day, all of this impressive code, all of the work FPGA Zoomspas has put into it is for one reason and one reason only, for you to have a good time, because he makes cores based upon what he enjoyed back in the day. And when he was testing games when the core first came out, he was just telling stories about his favorite Nintendo 64 games and why it was so important for him to have them on MiSTer, and you can totally tell that when you play the core. The sense of love and affection for the hardware is just there. But that's the current situation on the current MiSTer FPGA Nintendo 64 core as far as Wave Ray 64 is concerned. And I'm sure with new core updates, it's not going to get any different than that. And this is just a one-to-one experience with real hardware. It is fun, action-packed, and it really feels like you're playing real Nintendo 64 hardware with a better video out. But short of that, if you have any recommendations for more long-term one-video reviews, leave me a comment down below. But otherwise, we're done. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.